I guess talking about best practices and what's happening as far as here in Sauk Rapids, and really that's what I'm here to share is our process about how we got to the point that we are at right now, which is at the point that we are confident that we can have our staff at a district level be able to continue educating our students in whatever type of emergency that comes up. Now, we were prepared for a snow emergency. As I live in Minnesota, even this last year, we had a series of days that were actually canceled here because of cold days, much less we have some blizzards and snowstorms and all kinds of things. And we didn't see it as a very good decision to add those days to the end of the year, as you guys can imagine. So we wanted to develop a plan to be able to deliver e-learning days. So we didn't just want to transition and just say, hey, we're just going to, do this at a very low level. We wanted to make sure that we studied it, and we were, as it says here on this slide, that we were prepared for these days, that we were able to be flexible depending upon what happened. So if it was multiple days, and then finally that we had our teachers and even our students and our parents and all of our stakeholders be adaptable, so that we could adapt our plan to fit the circumstances, which now, in the light of the circumstances now, really is important. So we knew that we needed to have a plan in place so that everybody knew that we were going to continue to have high levels of learning, and that this learning wasn't going to be something that we did on the side or something that was optional, but rather that something that was robust, and we would continue the learning that we were delivering as far as face-to-face, or be able to go ahead and just basically make sure that we were stepping up and delivering those high levels of learning. And so we saw as the keys to success being these aspects, to being prepared and flexible and adaptable to whatever the circumstances that actually came up. So our plan, as far as preparedness, and here's the biggest advice that I would give you, is to do a proper audit of your school community's technology capabilities. So we did a survey of our students, our parents, and even of our local municipalities, basically to find out if our students had these things at home and at what level they had it. So did they have Wi-Fi at home? But we also said, okay, they may not have specifically Wi-Fi at home, but maybe they have cell phone access. And is it robust cell phone service that they can receive? Parts of our district are in rural areas that may or may not have a robust cell phone service provider. And so we made sure that we gathered as much data as we possibly could so that we knew what we were working with. And I think this part is often something that is neglected or done at a very surface level. And we wanted to make sure we dug deep into what kind of access do our students have, at what level, and what does that mean for the delivery of being able to teach and learn in these environments. So we wanted to expand it beyond that and said, in our communities, because we are Sauk Rapids and Rice as far as the two communities here, what types of access do students have, for example, at libraries and at coffee shops and other places where you may be able to go ahead and access Wi-Fi? What we ended up finding out for ourselves is that 96% plus of our students had at least a robust access to cell phone service. At 85%, I believe it was, somewhere near that, we had the ability for our students to access Wi-Fi. So really, it's a very personal, you have to personalize this decision to what happens at your district. That's what I'm trying to say. You may not have that type of access. So you need to make decisions based upon this first before you do anything else. So the proper audit of your stakeholders. Then what we found out too is we needed to check into our states and our local laws to make sure that we were complying to those aspects. So in Minnesota, currently there's a law that you can only have up to 5 e-learning days that actually will count as attendance. So it's super important as far as receiving funds from the state to make sure that you're complying with those laws. The state also may or may not have legislation in place that has to do with what type of delivery method, what do the lessons have to include, how do you find out, like we just talked about in the previous slide, what if students can't access those lessons, what is in place to be able to go ahead and accommodate those students. We needed a way to be able to accommodate obviously communication, and I'll talk about that in a bit as far as how vital that is, as far as the communication between not only our teachers and our students, but our parents and our teachers and then students, and basically being able to communicate all of us within the same hub and being able to do that effectively and easily. And then finally, as I put here, number of days, as we start looking into this, we have actually reached out to our legislators and asked, what if we have to go beyond these 5 e-learning days? For example, in some parts of the United States, and actually for sure in the world, they've already gone way past 5 days. And so what happens at that point? Are they going to make adjustments? And it sounds like the legislatures, at least here in Minnesota, are working on adjusting our laws to be able to fit this specific crisis. And so that's an important thing to note before you start making any of those types of decisions. So I think the majority of the time I'm going to spend here on this slide here because it was the most important part for us here at Sauk Rapids. We knew that we needed to properly train our educators. We knew that face-to-face instruction and even blended instruction that I just finished describing isn't the same as being able to completely deliver an online product, be able to do e-learning. So we knew that we needed to adjust and revisit maybe some of these super important aspects of great instruction. So one of the on the slides here talks about, we talked about tech integration models, whether that would be like TPAC or PICRAT or SAMR, whatever it might be. We talked about what is the best integration look like between technology and pedagogy and obviously content and curriculum, and make sure that our educators are comfortable in those spaces. Then, of course, everything always starts off, and anything that I always describe starts off with measurable outcomes. So we're not going to just develop a lesson for a day that's just like, we didn't want to develop anything that was just for fun or just to spend time on. We wanted to make sure that whatever we were delivering was for a specific measurable outcome related to a specific standard. And that was a vital component of anything as we approached our entire plan and all of our training. We wanted to also make sure that our educators knew that in an online format, it's so different when you deliver materials than face-to-face as far as scaffolding is concerned and supporting your students. So what does that look like in an online format versus in a face-to-face environment? And some of them are shared, especially if you have teachers who are doing a great job as far as in a blended learning environment. You can definitely borrow some of those aspects and then be able to place them in a e-learning course. Same thing with chunking information, things that we take for granted when we teach face-to-face. In an online environment, it has to be, you have to be really conscious of those choices and make sure that you embed those things into the lessons as you go through them. We wanted to make sure, of course, that student choice was integrated part of our lessons, that we modeled both the process and the product, the expectations for those things. And then the part that sometimes gets left on the side is being able to provide timely feedback and also a time for reflection. So it wasn't just a time to just hammer through as much work as possible, but also give students the time to be able to reflect and then be able to go ahead and maybe even reflect with each other as far as their classmates and of course with the teacher, the educator. One of the things that we immediately ran into when we were in the process of creating this plan and getting feedback from our educators is many of our educators felt that this was like an add-on this e-learning day was just something that we would just kind of get through. And we wanted to make sure to emphasize the point that just because you're doing something online doesn't mean that it's less than what you could have done as far as face-to-face. It just means that you need to adjust and it's going to be different. My former director of technology here at Sauk Rapids talked about that you may not be able to do what you were going to do, let's say tomorrow if school was canceled, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be less than what you know, as far as the expectations and the outcomes. It just means that that specific lesson you may need to put a hold on that for a face-to-face type of lesson versus an online environment. I put here that's super important to not fall into the trap that it's not going to be as effective as face-to-face instruction, because as soon as our educators hear anything of that aspect, or our students hear that, or our stakeholders hear those types of things, then everybody just will say, well, this is not that important, I'm going to go ahead and just put it off to the side. So really important there. We began with this, basically this mantra. So how do we prepare our teachers for the realities of e-learning? One of the things that immediately I addressed with my colleagues, my teachers here at Sauk Rapids, is that you may need to put in more time on the back end. And if you've ever done any kind of blended learning, you understand this concept that you need to put in some time into the development and the lesson preparation and the organization of those lessons. On the back end, unlike you probably would in a face-to-face environment. So super important and vital to share this with your educators that this is going to be part of this process. You need to put in time to make sure you have clear and specific directions. I also wrote in my notes here that it is vital to have those directions in a variety of formats. I used to not only type in all of my directions on my Schoology assignment, but I had a video where I explained those in my voice. And that's actually a key component too. As we're working through that here at Sauk Rapids, we've talked to our educators that our students need to see and hear our own voices, that it makes a huge difference, that there is research behind that that says you are more likely to be engaged with something when you can see and hear the voice of a person that you recognize and respect. And so on. So it's not just the instructions as far as a bunch of words, which is important too, to have that also, but also to have our faces and our voices behind those things. We also, one of the aspects you may need to consider, and we've given our teachers the choice of doing one or the other depending upon their situations, or maybe even both. It depends on what ends up happening, whether or not they're going to have a synchronous delivery of their lesson or an asynchronous delivery of the lesson. And so synchronous being that you would have a specific time that your students are going to come and then being able to listen to their teacher and ask questions in a live session, like in conferences inside of Schoology, or an asynchronous delivery where a teacher pre-records all of the different aspects and then has the students interact with those at their own leisure. And sometimes, like I said, you may end up having both of those situations happen depending upon what the lesson is and what our educators are trying to do. But being able to teach those two methods, synchronous and asynchronous, is super important, and showing your educators like, how do you actually do this? And what's great is that there's there's a few different tools, I'm going to say a million, that are really helpful and dynamic and easy to go ahead and use to be able to go ahead and do both of these things. So the other part that as we went through this process, we're like, okay, we're on the same page, we're making inroads, and then someone brought up in a meeting, they said something like, what about the students? Are we going to prepare them, and are we going to be able to get our students to be able to interact correctly with these materials? How are we going to train them? And so preparing our students for e-learning is vital. That means that we have to have a multiple means of being able to communicate with them. We have to teach, I think, self-advocacy, because some students just will not ask those questions in a virtual environment. They just will not. They might have raised their hand in class or said something aloud, but in the virtual environment, it's either uncomfortable or they just don't know that they can actually ask these specific types of questions. So being self-advocates and making sure that they understand that it's important for them to ask those questions. Also, we were making sure that what we were going to assign at the tech level for our elementary students were not going to be the same things as what we were going to expect our high school students to be able to go ahead and do. And so age level appropriate work is not just curriculum and content. We're talking about the technology and the uses of it, and being able to go ahead and only use those things that we've trained and practiced with those students. So we have to train and practice with them on accessing these materials, and then not only like being able to click on a link or a video or whatever it might be, but how do they effectively engage with these online materials? They're used to in class for us to be able to redirect their attention to something and say, hey, take notes on this, do this kind of things, but how do they do that on their own? And that's a really key aspect that we have worked with our students on making sure that they understand that they need to be self-advocates, how to access materials, how to effectively engage with those materials. And it's not just a matter of like, showing them a couple of videos, whatever it might be, but really having them practice those things in class while we still have the opportunity to go and do so. And then the things that I think are very personal and belong in specific districts, and the questions you need to ask are, what about your special education students and fulfilling IEPs and contact time and making sure that you go ahead and do those things? How does that happen? At each different district, there's going to be a different solution for these things. So there is no one answer for any of these types of things, especially these are English language learners or other vulnerable students. Those are things that definitely need to be addressed, but at your district level, to make sure you have those conversations and you have a plan in place. So once we had a plan and we had talked to our educators, we've discussed some things with our students, we needed to reveal the plan to all of our stakeholders, and you will need to do this too. And we had these open forum meetings. We distributed through different questionnaires that were distributed through both text message and in a email fashion. And really what we wanted to do is get out all of those what if questions. And that drove the creation of basically our FAQ sheet, which we have access to, and you're more than welcome to look at ours and a whole bunch of other districts in Minnesota who have been willing to share their plans. But you want all of those questions to basically be asked and people to feel comfortable that you're addressing those, and you may or may not have the answers at the moment, but then you can go ahead and make the adjustments to be able to then, okay, what do we need to do in these situations? Or what is our response to X, Y, and Z? And then even now, we're continuing to adapt our FAQ sheets because circumstances have changed. It's no longer just the imminent, possible snowstorm, sorry, not imminent, but possible snowstorm, or this might happen, or whatever it might be. It's a real possibility that we may be out of school. So we continue to adapt and answer those questions and field those questions and adapt our FAQ sheet as we're going along in this process. So I think a lot of people get caught up on this slide right here. And this is where I think a lot of things are being shared. If you're on Twitter or whatever it might be, a lot of solutions are being shared. And we're going to call them EdTech solutions to different issues and problems. But before you can get to this slide, you need to address all of those other things and really have a strong plan in place before you get to the tools, basically. Our key component to our entire plan is Schoology. And it is the hub of all communication, both, like I had said before, not only our educators and our students, but our parents know that this is where our educators, the environment that they're going to live in and where they can go ahead and access them. And our administrators know that this is where we can pass on messages from the administrative level to our educators or even to district-wide messages. And it's so vital for all of us to know that there is, with certainty, that there's a place where all of us are going to be communicating at. And it's, like I said, it's the central hub of all of our communications, and obviously where all of our content delivery and our instruction will happen. And for us, it's integrated also with our SIS Skyward. And so the grade books and all of those kinds of things are all interconnected in this one hub. So it's where we live. And it's vital to have a place like this. I've seen, and throughout all of these different posts that have been happening, people offering all kinds of different solutions to the communication problem and the response. And I'm telling you right now that this is the easiest solution to all of those things. Being able to go ahead and directly communicate with your students as teachers easily is so vital for all of our parents to be able to ask questions, and our students obviously to be able to go ahead and do that, and our educators to expect that this is where everything will be fielded at is super key for us. To deliver synchronous lessons, we know that there's a tool inside of Schoology, formerly known as the Big Blue Button, that's just called conferences, Schoology conferences. And many of our advanced placement teachers already use conferences, so we're super excited that we can now use them as our examples. That not only is this possible, but it's super easy to use, and it's all embedded inside of the Schoology platform. So it's our go-to tool for synchronous instruction. It's easy to use, it's safe, it's within the LMS, so that makes us feel very confident in here, rather than using an outside kind of tool there. For asynchronous video, you could obviously just record a screencast or those types of things, but we like the interactivity that happens in Flipgrid, and many of our educators are already using that in blended learning environments. So it's a very easy tool to kind of say, this is where we're going to go to for asynchronous video. But don't get me wrong, we do a lot of screencasting and a lot of delivery of flipped lessons in the district. So people record those and obviously place them inside of their courses inside of Schoology. We also love the ability to be able to deliver lessons. If you were going to deliver a lesson, and let's say it was kind of a direct instruction type of lesson in a video conference session, then why not use Nearpod, where our students can interact with the lesson, both in a formative assessment kind of way, to be able to go ahead and give their opinions on things, to be able to drive the instruction. So we love Nearpod and the ability to embed that also inside of Schoology. For instructional videos, I always state, if you're going to use a video that's off of YouTube, please don't use the whole video. More than likely, the entirety of the video is not needed. So really, you can use Edpuzzle or PlayPosit as tools to be able to edit the video and cut out to the main portions, and then really drive instruction within the video itself. So having those pause points and being able to ask questions, being able to add extra information to fill in the gaps for our students, so key and vital, and really big fan of Edpuzzle, but like I said, PlayPosit also a very good tool. So review, we know this is the space where EdTech thrives, I think. There's so many tools out there. And I put on the slide here, tools like Quizlet and Decktoys and GimKit are amazing for review. Of course, you have Kahoot, Quizzes, and so many other types of review type tools. I think that's where EdTech usually shines, so I'm not too worried about that part. Really the part I'm not worried about it, but it's the most concern is the delivery of instruction and the ability for our students to be able to access that instruction and be able to differentiate that instruction to our specific students. So I have in place a eLearning Days best practices document that I'm more than willing to go ahead and share. And basically it has some links that I think are key. The links are a list of example plans from Minnesota based school districts that have shared the links to their websites, to their FAQ sheets, and so on and so forth, and how they develop their plan. There's also different links to how do you go ahead and design an online lesson plan. That's from Catlin Tucker. How do you curate, or sorry, there's a curated site with a Wakelet site with a bunch of remote learning resources that people have been sharing. And as things are being shared, and I think that they're high quality, I've been adding them to this document, and I'll make sure that I end up sharing it with everybody.